Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Queenly Conversation Podcast, the space where we learn from our collective journeys, lean into our individual greatness, and level up for the win. I am your host, Shanita Newton, and I'm grateful to have you join us. On today's episode, we are conversing about standing in our power and reclaiming our voices. And to help us facilitate this conversation, I'm super excited to have our first guest to the QC podcast, Miss Keisha Shields. Keisha is a women's leadership advisor, executive coach, and the founder of She Will Not Be Silenced. She teaches women leaders and executives how to take their stories, experiences, and expertise and create the $1 million body of work. Keisha's approach to women's wealth through executive leadership involves key strategies for claiming voice, identifying and overcoming barriers to visibility, breaking glass ceilings, and developing $1 million movements. So let's get this discussion started. Hello, and welcome. Thank you for joining me for today's episode of the Queenly Conversations podcast. I am excited to have with us today Keisha Shields. And so we are going to go ahead and jump right into it. First of all, Keisha, welcome to the Queenly Conversations podcast. You are my first guest on this podcast, so thank you so much. I appreciate you being able to just sit down and talk with us and just have a conversation and a dialogue about reclaiming your voice. It's something that so many, not even just women, but so many individuals have to navigate and process and don't even know that it's something that they are working to navigate through. So I appreciate you just taking the time to sit down and talk to us.
Yes, I'm so happy to be here, Shanita. Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll jump right into it. If you could just tell everyone, well, first, let's define what it means to lose and reclaim your voice. What is the voice in the context of this conversation?
Yeah. So, your voice is really, it's truth, right? It is truth. It is what is true for you, your experiences. Like when I work with my clients, we tend to call it like, people love acronyms. So you want to think about it being what I call your very own intuitively censored experience, right?
Yes.
Voice are the things that you naturally censor. The experiences that you have maybe gone through that you don't want to talk about, right? Nobody tells you you can't talk about them. But a lot of times when we're talking about voice, reclaiming voice, finding voice, we're talking about those things that you know in your gut you're supposed to be sharing and saying, right? That's what I want you to think about as you're like weaving your own thoughts throughout this conversation, is thinking about those things when I say voice. It is your ability to bring truth to light, in whatever way that means for you.
Yeah, and that's so good. That's really good. I always associated it with just my power and my presence, like how I show up.
Yes.
And making that stand when something matters to me.
Yes.
And then for me personally, when I began to be silent is when I could really, instead of like speaking my truth, is when I realized that I had, in some ways, you feel like you've lost your power when you don't speak your truth.
Yes, absolutely. And we're going to get into that as well, because it's so true. And I think, Shanita, that's where a lot of people find themselves when they realize they've kind of maybe lost their voice or aren't amplifying it. Usually they're at that crossroads right there. Yeah.
So then would you mind telling us or sharing your story about when you realized that you had lost your voice and just your experience in overcoming that and finding your truth again?
Yeah, absolutely. In a nutshell, for me, it was when I actually started to bring my business online, actually. I had no problem really, kind of in my circles and the physical space, really with kind of, bringing truth to light. I'm going to put an asterisk mark on that one. I'm going to come back to it because I'm going to be real about it, right?
Okay.
But for me, a lot of it came when I had to move into the online sphere, which for me was back in like 2000, maybe 10 or 11. And I was always worried kind of about the judginess of people who didn't know me, right? Yeah. You know, everybody is online and everybody has an opinion and all of these things. And so I felt like I had to have this kind of like picture perfect representation of who I was, or if not, people wouldn't see me as the best of the best and want to spend their money with me, you know? Right. And so I found myself like, I actually got into a state of like, kind of just frozen, a state of like being frozen. Because I'm like, well, I can't say this thing. I can't say this stuff. I can't, you know, all of that. And nobody told me I couldn't, right? But it was because I'm like, well, if I do that, then people are not going to X, Y, and Z, right? And so for me, that was like the last straw, if you will. It's like I spent years, like my husband, they're like, look, boo, okay, because I spent years creating, I mean, some of my best work, a lot of it never saw the light of day, Shanita. Right. Oh, wow. By the time I would actually put it out there, I had to convince myself of all these things. I couldn't be who I was and all of those stuff. Right. And so a lot of people who come to me are at that place where they're like, I'm a private person. So being a private person and a public figure in your domain is a very challenging place to be. And so I have found that I had really kind of lost my voice and stopped speaking what was true for me for fear of being negatively judged or misjudged. Yeah. I'm like, they don't even know me and they're going to form an opinion about who I am. And so for me, that was like the final straw. But moving back one level, when I was in the corporate space, when I left the corporate space, I was a COO. And I felt like I was just there to kind of like be the yes girl, if you will, you know, and I found that I wasn't able to truly speak up against things. I was outnumbered by the men, right? Only sister up in that camp, you know, and all of those things. And so that was kind of like the space where I started to notice, Shanita, that I wasn't able to really speak against things without fear of losing the coveted C-suite position, right? And those kinds of things. And it was tough because all of my life, I was very vocal and I spoke about a lot of things, right? People who know me are like, I can't believe that you actually were at a place where you lost your voice or you felt like you couldn't use it. And because you do start to feel shame about it and you don't always realize it, especially when you are either in a career and you're wanting to accelerate or you're running your own enterprise. You know, it's a little bit of shameful for people who know you otherwise as someone who can truly speak on, you know, against things, to really be in that position. And so for me, it was that fear of being judged that just kept me frozen for so long, Shanita. And it just got to the point I was like, I cannot do this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's so interesting that you said that it paralyzed you, because in a lot of cases, that's what it does to stop you from living your truth. It really is just a tool of the enemy to keep you from living your truth and your purpose. And to go back to what you said, because of the fear of being judged. And I think one of my issues that I had to overcome was the fear of feeling like I was saying the wrong thing, you know?
Okay.
And so it's just so interesting and consoling and comforting that other people had that same experience, but they're able to free themselves from these self-imposed. These are self-imposed. Like we think these things are self. It's not necessarily the truth. But you allow those to keep you from sharing your actual truth.
Yeah, agree. And I think, Shanita, that's why it's so important for us to look at other people who inspire us, right? Others who have been through that and they're like, look, believe it or not, I was there. I get it, right? I have that conversation all the time. There was a client one time that didn't realize it was a group call. She didn't know I was on the call. I was just kind of just perusing, and she made a statement to one of the advisors, and she was like, "Can you have Keisha like bottle up her confidence and sell it, right?" And she didn't know I was on the call, and it tickled me because I was like, if only you knew me just a few short years ago, right? What a difference, right? You may not have even known what a difference like your life can turn and you can turn when you can get to that place, Shanita, where you realize that your voice is power.
Yeah. So Keisha, then tell us about that, like how you began to free yourself and what actionable items that we can take to help to rediscover and fall in love with our truths and live those proudly.
Yeah. So, my story in that way is the one I'm going to tell, just the real one, which is one day I woke up and I didn't care anymore. Like, I know people love like I did, don't get me wrong. I was able to do that because I had done the work, right? You know what I'm saying? I had been taking the incremental steps, which I will talk about. But one day I just didn't care anymore. And I don't know if what God like shifted me and shaped me while I was asleep. I don't know what it was. If he's like, she needs help, let me help her, right? But I just didn't care. And when I look back on it, for me, one of the biggest things, there were a couple of things that I had to do. And it was to do my work. So I have this framework called, we'll call it this assets model, right? Okay. Where you go through and you outline what are the accomplishments that I have done related to what I want to be known for or what I want to teach, right? And when I started realizing like, yeah, I've accomplished a lot because you forget it, right? You forget all the things that you have accomplished up until that point. Because I started to kind of be who I was just in that moment. And I had to remember, no, Keisha, you have a whole life history, right, of being who you are. These people did not create, nor make, nor shift you into being that. You've done your work, right? And so identifying my accomplishments was one of the big ones. Another one in that model, I'll just tell you the ones that were key, was for me owning my expertise. That was one that made a big difference for me, right? And I think a lot of people kind of get fearful about that one. Like, well, I don't have the MD, PhD, JD suite of stuff, right? What do you mean I have expertise? That is one of the beautiful things about really reclaiming your voice, is that those intuitively censored experiences are your expertise. You've navigated it, the ups and downs. A lot of times there's trauma and grief associated with those experiences, right? The fact that you made it through, you navigated those things probably for years, that is a huge source of your expertise. And I need people to shift their mindset to really see that. So I had to own for myself, Shanita, that, although I'm pretty fabulous, the thing that I knew for me, thank you, was that part of my journey was helping women to no longer feel silenced, right? And I'm like, I have expertise in that because I've navigated that journey myself successfully. I've helped other people through it. And so create your own lane. If you feel like, well, I'm not an expertise in this thing or that thing, then you come out and tell people what you're an expert in, where your expertise lies. And so that's where She Will Not Be Silenced itself kind of became birthed, because I'm like, I need to live this experience of what I did, of feeling silenced in the workplace, feeling silenced in the online space, in the business world, all of those things. So for me, it was identifying my accomplishments and also understanding and identifying my expertise. Another part in there is your thought leadership. And when you want to think about thought leadership, what I always tell people is you want to think about what are the perspectives that you have that are different than other people's. Like, what do you think about a certain thing? A lot of my clients who come to me because they heard my perspective on something. And they're like, oh, and people don't often think about that. It's those kind of little tweaks that can make a really big difference to you feeling confident, to you knowing that you can take what you've been through, Shanita, and actually form it into your expertise, your accomplishments, all of those things, right? But it's taking those experiences, using your voice to share your perspective, because your perspective is not going to be the same as everyone else who is out in the forefront, right? And people want to find people they can identify with. Like, oh my God, somebody else thinks the same thing, right?
Yes. And we're not as isolated and as different as many would have us to believe.
No.
So our shared experiences,
makes a big difference. And so, and then the last part that I'll share about that in terms of actionable steps, where you should share experiences, which is you need to really identify who are your strategic alliances and partnerships. What I always say, and I've worked through this like myself, when I used to be worried about sharing my perspective on things, because it was quite different, right? Than a lot of things that was in my world. I would always like tell a friend, like, look, I'm going to make this post. Can you just come on there and like show it some love? Cause I'm going to delete it, talk myself out of it. The first negative comment, I'm going to like remove it. Right.
Yeah.
And so I did that. And I advise other women to do that. Right. It's like, if you're worried about the perception of something, calling your allies, calling your friends, right, to come and encourage and support you so that you don't talk yourself out of even pushing the button for it. Because I'll tell them, I'm going to make this post. This is back then. And come check on it in 3 minutes, because I know sometimes you won't even hit the button, right? But it's like, think about your strategic alliances and your partners and your friends who can support you and show support for the fact that you are sharing what is true for you, that you're using your voice.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Especially because that's even applicable to like our personal lives, right? So not even just in the workplace, but in our family dynamics, in our homes, and then just with ourselves, like what we're telling ourselves, just the ability to push. So we got to push through the fear, right? And just start speaking our truth. And I think what you said is pivotal in making sure that we have accountability partners and motivators and our friends and our partners, and that they help push us and guide us lovingly to not be afraid.
Agreed. And then one thing too, Shanita, I want to add to that, where you were talking about your friends and partners, it's like sometimes people feel like I don't really have that. And this is what I would say for y'all. I'm going to give y'all a little tip that I typically give to my clients, right? Is when you feel like I don't really have anybody to support me, or my family members don't understand, they're not on their journey, whatever the case is, align yourself with a cause that is reflective of your perspective, right?
Okay.
So, for example, if I'll just take mine, for example, like let's say that one of your issues is that you have been afraid to use your voice, or you're trying to reclaim your voice, right? Connect with other causes or businesses or people who that's all they do and talk about, because you're going to find your people right in there, right? It's going to feel like home. If you're passionate about, supporting the next generation of entrepreneurs, right? But you don't have anybody in your world who is passionate about that or who cares about that, find the businesses, the causes, the charities, the communities where that is the focus, and insert yourself right in it, because those are going to be your people.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. Thank you for that. I just want to go back to what you said about, what was it? Something in relations to when you said about speaking. about the tweaks in your perspective, right? I think that's so pivotal because we, while we're so alike, even our unique traits, right? Or like I say, like I like call my quirks.
Yes. Yes.
Are so they're really important in the beautiful way that God made us to be, right? Because He didn't make us all to be the same.
Yes.
But even in our differences, in those quirks and in those differences, we're able to help provide perspective for other people. And then just our stories, our unique stories, help to encourage and empower others. And so when we're not afraid, or when we can push through the fear, because it's okay to be afraid, you just can't allow it to stop you.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
And when we feel like we're different, or we feel like we have those tweaks or quirks in our perspective that don't necessarily align with what other people think exactly, it can be a little fearful to put yourself out there. But it's in those moments that you are able to kind of change the conversation or change the narrative because you had a different perspective. And so it's so important to not allow that to stop you from speaking your truth.
Yeah, absolutely.
And using your voice. Yeah.
Agreed. And just right along with that, Shanita, in terms of using your voice, is remember that you are uniquely qualified because of your experience.
Yeah.
Right. And so that is something that no one anywhere can take away from you. Someone can have the most scholarly perspective on something, which is great. But knowing that your experience qualifies you in such a different way, I think is a beautiful entry into being able to feel capable of holding your own, if you will, like in the conversation, because no one can take that from you. Well, like, okay, great. So let me tell you from my own experience what took place, right? You can hold on to that as a confidence tool for yourself to understand, because, it is what it is. And the best scholarly material is great, but when you can merge it and marry it with the things that you have been through in your life, or the things that you've seen others go through, because some people I haven't really been through anything. I'm sure you know people who have, right? And it's okay to lean into what your experience of their story is, right? As a part of your story. And that's the beauty in really leaning into your story as a gateway to unleashing and claiming and reclaiming your voice. And I think we don't lean into that enough. We feel like, well, I don't have a degree in that thing, or, whatever the case is. It's like, okay, maybe not. But what is your experience? What have you been through? And what can you use how can you use your experience to enlighten and serve someone else? Because what we don't want is the one-uppers. You do not want to be a one-upper. Somebody tells their story and you like, oh, well, that's nothing. What I did, like, no. You still have to be a decent person. Okay. Yeah. Be a decent person, but how can you use what you've been through to help serve others? Like, I could easily have not talked about feeling silenced and how that kept me from moving into my wealth provisions and all of those things. But when I do talk about it, there are other people who are, for example, similarly situated, right? Like, you have people, a lot of people talk about finding voice, right? But when I talk specifically to entrepreneurs and executives, a lot of times they're like, oh my gosh, like, you were that and you understand. You see what I'm saying? Like, the most scholarly perspective can be there, where they're like, you understand me. And that's what people want. When you're thinking about voice, how can you use it as an opportunity to show others that you understand?
Yeah. The word that comes to mind when you, from that, is just the intersectionality of our experiences, right?
Yes.
So the intersection of being a Black woman, a single mother, or a single father, or just the experience of growing up in the South. So we have so many experiences that help help us to become who we are.
Yes. Yes.
And they help us to have a unique perspective that we can then share with the world.
Absolutely. And when you say that, Shanita, I'm going to share one thing also, that when you talk about intersectionality, because what I talk about a lot here is that it is that intersectionality of how your experiences shape your identities. Yeah. Right. And I think that's where a lot of people, you hear about the identity crisis. And I think a lot of people, as we are maturing, as we are moving into the next phases of our lives, I do think that a majority of us experience an identity crisis of sorts, right? Just because of our varied experiences that we've been through. Because when you talk about your experience of like being Black, that is an identity. Being a woman, that is an identity. Being a mom, that's an identity. Being a single mother, that's an identity, right? You think about all the identities that we hold at any one given time. What do you do when those identities seem to be in conflict with who you are, right? Yeah. And so really understanding that intersectionality of how identity can create dissonance, right? Dissonance meaning like that disconnect, the disharmony in your life. How identity can shape dissonance, right? And how finding your voice can actually move you into legacy. And the intersectionality of those things, I think, are so important to understand.
And in that intersectionality, I feel like so many of us, that's how we relate to each other. Right. Yes. So it is our shared experiences that really bring us together, and those unique perspectives that help us to learn from each other.
Yes.
So, and that's why I find it's imperative for us to be able to share our collective experiences and to really use our voice in spite of the fear. Yeah. In spite of the fear. Yeah. To move past it and push through it.
I agree. And then too, along with that fear, Shanita, when you talk about like, we need to move through it, right? Like that's what I want people, we need to move through it. I personally, my experience was I had to move with the fear, through the fear. I couldn't set the fear to the side and then move around it. That was not my experience, right? But what I had to understand and do my deep work in is, why was the fear there in the first place? What was I afraid of? What was I worried about? And when I got to the root of that, I was worried that me, this very vocal person, would spend the rest of her life like silenced and not being able to speak up and share and all of those things,
Well, before we close out today, I would love for you to share some resources with our audience so that everyone can just kind of know what they can do to further the progress of reclaiming our voices.
Yes, absolutely. The first thing I want to say is that I'm very proud of you. When you're at a place where you realize that you're in a bit of disharmony and dissonance, when you're like, I feel like I'm only being a shell of myself, or I'm not really being able to live my full, whole self. I want to say I'm proud of you, because that can be a very, it's like we call it walking in the unknown and the unseen, right? Walking the unseen path is very challenging, right? It's like walking in the dark and you can see a little light. You're trying to follow that light as long as you can see it, right? So I'm proud of you for being in that place in your life where you realize that you are able to serve in such a different capacity with the things that you've been through. And also with your actual expertise in what you do, right? So I wanted to say that. And so in terms of resources, so I have a podcast called She Will Not Be Silenced. And I really encourage anyone who is feeling like whether you feel like you don't know, you haven't been able to find your voice, or you need to reclaim it, or you whatever it is, right? If you're fearful, if you are navigating shame, uncertainty, lack of support, any of those things, there are episodes for you. What I did was really be very transparent about the journey and the twists and turns that it can take, to no longer be silenced. If you're wanting, especially if you are someone who desires to move forward in a more leadership capacity in your life, hear that in your life. Didn't just say at work, didn't just say in business, right? But if you find that you're wanting to show up as a more full, calm version of yourself, I really recommend that you listen to the podcast and take notes, because I share a lot of tips that I typically only share sometimes with my private clients throughout that. That's the biggest thing that I will say for that. Like, there are episodes for almost everyone, from finding your voice in the workplace, specifically in the boardroom, in the bedroom, in your friendship circles, like all of those things, because I believe in being true to what is true to me, right? So I just wanted to say that. So I encourage everyone to do that. Also, what I will do is, Shanita, is I will share, it's not actually public, I will share an audio class that I have on a leadership class about when you're at that intersection, that crossroads of realizing that you need to reclaim your voice, like how to navigate the feelings that happen in that space and actually how to push through it. So I will share that for your listeners to have, because I think it's going to be some really awesome nuggets in there. And it really is a thing of meeting you where you are, not talking above you, but understanding that it's a journey that I'm walking every single day, is to claim voice and to use that voice to claim visibility, is so important, because I feel, Shanita, that our voices are really the catalyst for what I call our $1 million body of work. And I think if we can truly own our voices and amplify our voices, we can move into that place of $1 million body of work and legacy.
Okay. Thank you. So be sure to download Keisha's masterclass. Yes. And then tell us where we can find more information about you, your website, your social.
Yeah, so you can go on KeishaShields.com. That is kind of my home base. You can even find the podcast there. You can subscribe to my list. Yes.
Oh, and they'll be in the show notes also.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So go to KeishaShields.com. And also I'm on social, not as much as I should be, but at Keisha P. Shields. P like pretty. At Keisha P. Shields on Instagram and Facebook. And also you can find me on LinkedIn, just Keisha Shields. So I'll get those links for you all to have that. And I look forward to connecting.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your time. It's been a really great conversation. Thank you for being my first guest.
Yay.
And she don't know it yet, y'all, but she's secretly like my life coach too. So
let's connect.
I look forward to it. Yes. So yeah. Well, that is going to be all. And until our next episode, be sure to, if you like this episode, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe by clicking the button. And I look forward to speaking with everyone next time. So take care.
Bye-bye.
My voice matters, and it deserves to be heard. It is my power, my unique contribution to the world. I embrace it and I honor it. And by speaking my truth, I am set free.